What happens when a group of racist men targets the wrong black woman, thinking she's an easy victim, only to find out that she is a former Navy SEAL? Watch as she fights back against the group and uncovers a shocking secret that leads to wide-scale justice against racism in the community. The sun bathed the park in a soft, golden glow, casting long shadows of swaying trees over the worn paths. Laughter from a distant group of children playing on the swings mingled with the faint chirping of birds. On a lone bench near the edge of a small pond, Morgan Blake sat quietly, taking a rare moment to enjoy the stillness of the afternoon. Her black leather jacket rested beside her, revealing a muscular frame beneath a simple gray t-shirt and jeans. A faint scar on her forearm, just visible under the sunlight, was the only hint of a life forged in battles far from here. Morgan's eyes scanned her surroundings, more out of habit than suspicion. A jogger passed by, giving her a polite nod, which she returned. Her time as a Navy SEAL had sharpened her instincts, and even now, years removed from active duty, she couldn't help but notice the small details: the awkward shuffle of a man a few yards away, a group of teenagers lingering too long near a playground. Nothing seemed particularly unusual, but something about the air felt off. Across the park, a group of 4 men loitered near the base of an old oak tree. Their laughter was sharp and mean, cutting through the tranquil ambiance like a blade. The leader, a tall, broad-shouldered man in a black hoodie, leaned casually against the tree, surveying the park like a predator stalking prey. Gary Tank Walker wasn't the kind of man who blended in. His shaved head gleamed in the sun, and the faded tattoos snaking up his neck hinted at a life lived on the fringes. He nudged the man next to him, a wiry figure with a patchy beard, and gestured in Morgan's direction. "That one," Tank muttered, his voice low but carrying a sneer. "Sitting there all smug like she owns the place." "Easy pickings," Patchy Beard chuckled, cracking his knuckles. "Think she'll put up a fight?" Tank smirked. "She'll try. They always do." Morgan felt their eyes on her before she saw them. A subtle prickle ran down her spine, and her body tensed ever so slightly. She turned her head slowly, catching their gaze for just a moment. They didn't look away. That was her first confirmation. They were trouble. She kept her posture relaxed, one arm draped over the back of the bench, the other resting on her lap. Her breathing remained steady, but her mind began to assess. 4 of them. Broad shoulders on the leader, wiry build on the second. The other 2 were younger, maybe early 20s, with cocky postures that screamed overconfidence. A mix of cheap cologne and cigarettes wafted over on the breeze, confirming their proximity. "All right, gentlemen," Morgan muttered under her breath, a hint of a wry smile forming. "Let's see what you've got." The men began to move, their conversation growing louder as they crossed the park toward her. Their laughter carried over the playground, drawing the attention of a few passers-by who quickly looked away, uninterested in getting involved. Tank walked in front, his stride slow and deliberate. Patchy Beard and the 2 younger men flanked him like wolves circling a lone deer. Morgan didn't flinch. Instead, she shifted slightly, making herself look just vulnerable enough to tempt them further. Her instincts told her these men were used to picking off easy targets, feeding on fear. They didn't know who they were dealing with. Yet, Tank reached the edge of the path near Morgan's bench, his boots crunching against the gravel. His smirk widened, exposing teeth stained from years of cigarettes and cheap coffee. Behind him, Patchy Beard chuckled, while the 2 younger men exchanged a glance, their excitement barely contained. They spread out slightly, forming a loose semicircle around Morgan's bench. "Afternoon, ma'am," Tank said, his voice oily and dripping with mock politeness. "Mighty nice day for sitting out here all alone, don't you think?" Morgan looked up slowly, her expression calm, her eyes narrowing just enough to convey she wasn't intimidated. "It was," she said evenly. "What do you want?" Tank chuckled, glancing back at his crew as if Morgan had told a joke. "Now, that's no way to greet friendly folks just out for a chat. You got something against a few good old boys stopping to say hi?" Patchy Beard leaned closer, his grin revealing yellowed teeth. Or maybe she's just one of them types, Tank, thinking she's too good to talk to the likes of us. Morgan didn't answer, her gaze darting between them, reading their postures, calculating distances. They were close now. Too close. Close enough that any sudden move could spark the conflict she knew was brewing. "You hear me, lady?" Patchy Beard's voice turned sharp. "You think you're better than us?" One of the younger men, his face flushed with sunburn, sneered. "Bet she's one of those uppity ones, thinking this park belongs to her kind now." Morgan's jaw tightened, but she kept her voice steady. "I don't think anything belongs to me. I'm just sitting here, minding my business." "Oh, you hear that, boys?" Tank drawled, stepping closer. "She's just minding her business. Guess we'll mind it for her." He pointed at the bag resting beside Morgan on the bench. "That's a nice bag. Bet it's got something good in it. Why don't you be polite and hand it over? We wouldn't want things to get messy." Morgan's lips twitched, almost imperceptibly, into a faint smirk. "Is that what you call polite these days? Stealing from people who look like me?" Tank's face darkened, the fake smile dropping for a moment. "Now, what's that supposed to mean?" "You know exactly what it means," Morgan shot back, her voice cold. "You didn't pick me because I'm sitting alone. You picked me because you think I'm an easy target." The younger man stepped closer, his voice rising with anger. "You got a mouth on you, huh? Probably the same one you use to cry racism every time things don't go your way." Morgan stood up slowly, her movements deliberate. The shift in height gave her a presence they weren't expecting. She was shorter than Tank, but carried herself with the quiet authority of someone who had stood in far worse places than this. Her calm, unwavering gaze unsettled them, though none of them would admit it. "You really think this is going to go the way you planned?" she said quietly, her tone measured, each word a challenge. "Walk away, while you still can." Patchy Beard laughed, but there was an edge of nervousness to it. "Look at her, trying to play tough. What are you gonna do, lady? Call the cops? Like they'd show up for someone like you." The younger men joined in the laughter, emboldened by the twisted camaraderie of their group. Tank stepped closer, his eyes narrowing. He was no longer playing around. The air between them thickened with unspoken tension, and Morgan felt the shift. This was the moment. "I don't think you're listening, lady," Tank said, his voice low and venomous. "We're taking that bag. And maybe we'll take something else, too." Morgan's pulse quickened, not from fear, but from the anticipation of what was to come. Her SEAL instincts kicked in, analyzing every angle, every escape route, every weakness in their formation. Her mind replayed the lessons drilled into her during years of grueling training. Stay calm, control the situation, strike hard, and don't stop until the threat is neutralized. But she waited. They hadn't made the first move yet, and she needed to be sure the threat was imminent. Her hands, seemingly relaxed at her sides, subtly shifted into position, ready for action. Tank leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a growl. "This ain't a game, lady. Give us the damn bag, or we're gonna show you what happens when you don't respect your betters." Morgan met his gaze, her voice like steel. "You're going to regret this." Morgan gripped the strap of her bag tightly and stood, her body tense, but her face calm. The group of men watched her with sneers and mocking eyes, expecting her to react out of fear. She adjusted the strap over her shoulder, keeping her voice steady as she said, "I've got somewhere to be." Without waiting for a response, she turned and started walking. Her steps were measured, her breathing controlled, though her pulse quickened. She had no intention of running. It would only embolden them. But she wasn't about to stand there and give them the satisfaction of a response. Behind her, their voices rose, taunting and louder now, like a pack of jackals circling their prey. "Hey, where you going?" one of the younger men called, his voice carrying an edge of mockery. "We ain't done talking, lady." Morgan ignored him, keeping her pace steady as she scanned for an exit. The park's main thoroughfare was ahead, but the tree-lined path she had chosen felt suddenly too quiet, too far removed from the safety of crowds. The crunch of their footsteps on gravel grew louder, closer. Her jaw tightened. "Come on now. Don't be like that," Patchy Beard jeered. "Ain't you used to folks like us talking to you? Or you too good for that?" Morgan clenched her teeth, fighting the urge to look back. She rounded a corner and stopped abruptly when she realized her mistake. The clearing ahead was wide and open, but they had moved faster than she expected. They blocked the path now, spreading out in a loose semicircle. Tank stood in the center, his broad shoulders squared, his smug grin daring her to make a move. Patchy Beard was at his side, cracking his knuckles, while the two younger men flanked them, leaning casually against trees as if they had all the time in the world. "Well now," Tank drawled, his tone dripping with mock politeness. "Look at you, all cornered. Bet you didn't think this one through, did you?" Morgan turned to glance behind her, but one of the younger men had circled back, cutting off her escape route. She was boxed in, her eyes flicked between them, reading their stances, their movements. Her body was calm, but her mind was racing. There was no reasoning with them, not with men like these. Tank took a step forward, his grin widening. "You lost, sweetheart? This ain't your part of town." Morgan met his gaze, her voice calm but cold. "I'm not lost. Now if you'll move, I'll be on my way." Patchy Beard chuckled, stepping closer. "Oh, you think you can just walk away? Like we're just gonna let you? Nah, lady, you don't get it. This ain't a free ride for your kind." Morgan's jaw tightened, but she kept her expression neutral. "I don't want any trouble." "Oh, we know you don't," Tank sneered. "People like you never do. Just want to sit there all smug, acting like you belong, like you can just take up space like the rest of us. But see, that's the thing. You don't." One of the younger men pushed off the tree, pointing at Morgan with an accusing finger. "She thinks she's better than us. You see it, right? The way she looks at us, like she's too good. Probably one of those types who cries racism every time something doesn't go her way." "Yeah," Patchy Beard added, his voice sharpening. "Bet she's had it easy her whole life. Probably never worked a day for nothing. Everything handed to her just 'cause of some pity sob story." Morgan exhaled sharply, her patience wearing thin. "You don't know anything about me." Tank's smirk turned into a sneer. "Oh, I know enough. You're just like the rest of 'em. Always looking for a handout, always expecting everyone else to step aside. Well, guess what? Not today." Morgan shifted slightly, adjusting her stance. Her calm, steely gaze didn't waver. "I've already warned you. Walk away, and this ends here." Patchy Beard threw his head back in laughter. "Warn us? Listen to her, Tank. Think she's in charge here." "You ain't in charge of nothing, lady," Tank growled, his tone darkening. "You're gonna hand over that bag, and maybe, just maybe, we'll let you walk out of here without a bruise." Morgan scanned their faces, her instincts kicking in. These men weren't here for her bag. That was just the excuse. This was about power, about making her feel small. They wanted her to submit. They wanted a show. She stood her ground, her voice steady and sharp. "You've had your chance." The words were barely out of her mouth before one of the younger men lunged at her. Morgan sidestepped smoothly, her movements quick and precise. She didn't strike, not yet. Her SEAL instincts told her to act fast and decisively, but she needed them to cross the line fully. Tank's face twisted with rage as he barked, "What are you waiting for? Get her!" Tank's order hung in the air for only a second before the younger man lunged again, this time with more force. Morgan moved instinctively, stepping aside and grabbing his arm in one fluid motion. Using his momentum against him, she twisted sharply, sending him sprawling to the ground with a yelp. He groaned, clutching his arm as he rolled onto his side, momentarily out of the fight. The group froze for a beat, their faces shifting from smug confidence to shocked disbelief. Morgan turned her attention to the rest of them, her stance calm but unyielding. She adjusted the strap of her bag over her shoulder, her eyes narrowing. "I told you to walk away," Patchy Beard sneered, though there was hesitation in his movements now. "Oh, you're gonna regret that, lady." Tank stepped forward, his imposing frame towering over her. "Think you're tough, huh? We'll see how long that lasts." He swung at her, a wide, uncoordinated blow meant to overwhelm rather than connect. Morgan ducked easily, her movements smooth and practiced. She drove her elbow into his ribs as she rose, forcing him to stumble back, his breath hitching. He clutched his side, his face contorting with pain and anger. "Come on, all of you!" Tank barked, motioning for the others. "Take her down!" Morgan's muscles tensed as the remaining men closed in. Patchybeard moved first, his fists raised, swinging wildly at her. She deflected his strikes with precision, her movements economical and deliberate. A sharp kick to his knee sent him reeling, his balance faltering just enough for Morgan to shove him backward. He hit the ground with a thud, cursing loudly. The younger man who had been leaning against the tree rushed her next, his approach more cautious but no less aggressive. Morgan stepped into his attack, blocking his swing and driving her palm into his chest. The impact forced him to stumble back, gasping for air, but he managed to stay on his feet. He glared at her, his face red with exertion. "You're gonna pay for that," he growled, circling her warily. Morgan didn't respond. Her eyes stayed locked on him, her body poised to react. She felt the familiar burn of adrenaline coursing through her veins, her focus razor-sharp. This wasn't just a fight, it was survival. Tank recovered and advanced again, his movements slower but more deliberate this time. "You think you're some kind of hero?" he spat. "You think you can walk into our park and show us up?" Morgan turned to face him fully, her voice calm but firm. "This isn't your park, and I'm not the one showing anyone up. You've done that to yourselves." Her words only seemed to enrage him further. He feinted left, then threw a punch aimed at her head. Morgan ducked and countered with a swift strike to his torso, followed by a low kick to his shin. Tank stumbled but stayed upright, his fists swinging again, more out of frustration than strategy. Morgan sidestepped effortlessly, forcing him to overextend and lose balance. "Come on, Tank!" Patchybeard shouted, struggling to his feet. "Stop playing around." Morgan caught movement in her periphery and turned just in time to block an attack from one of the younger men. He had grabbed a tree branch, swinging it like a bat, but Morgan stepped inside his reach and twisted it out of his hands. A quick shove sent him backward, and he tripped over his own feet, landing hard on the gravel path. Tank roared in frustration, charging at her with everything he had. This time, Morgan let him come closer, sidestepping at the last second and using his momentum to drive him into a nearby tree. The impact was solid, and Tank staggered, clutching the bark for support as he tried to regain his footing. Patchybeard, emboldened by her brief distraction, lunged at her from behind. Morgan felt his presence and spun, catching him mid-charge. She delivered a sharp elbow strike to his chest, followed by a push that sent him crashing to the ground once again. The fight was chaotic and relentless, but Morgan's movements were precise, her training evident in every calculated strike. Still, she wasn't unscathed. Her ribs ached from a poorly blocked punch, and her forearm throbbed where the younger man's branch had grazed her. But she pushed the pain aside, her focus unbroken. Tank stumbled back into the clearing, his face twisted in fury. "You think this is over?" he snarled, his voice a mix of anger and desperation. "You're gonna regret this, lady. You're gonna regret messing with us." Morgan straightened, her breathing steady despite the effort she'd exerted. "No," she said, her tone ice-cold. "You're the one who's going to regret it." The remaining men, bruised and battered, exchanged uncertain glances. Patchybeard was slow to rise, his confidence visibly shaken. One of the younger men backed away, muttering something under his breath about it not being worth it. But Tank wasn't done. His pride and his ego wouldn't let him back down. "You think you've won?" he spat. "You don't know what you've started." Morgan's eyes narrowed. "Then let's finish it." But before either of them could move, a distant sound pierced the tension, the faint wail of approaching sirens. The gang's heads snapped toward the sound, their expressions shifting from anger to uncertainty. Tank's eyes narrowed, his mind racing to decide whether his pride was worth the risk of getting caught. "You hear that?" one of the younger men muttered, taking a cautious step back. Cops are coming. So what? Tank barked, his voice rising in frustration. We're not done here. Patchy Beard wasn't so sure. He shifted his weight uncomfortably, glancing at Tank. Look, man, this ain't worth it. Shut up, Tank growled, pointing a finger at him. We don't run. We finish this. Morgan stood her ground, her breathing even despite the ache spreading through her ribs. She could see the fractures forming in their unity, the cracks in the facade of confidence that had emboldened them earlier. The sirens grew louder, closer, a promise of intervention that the gang couldn't ignore. Tank, the younger man said again, his voice more urgent. She's not worth it. Let's go. Tank turned back to Morgan, his eyes blazing with rage and frustration. He took a step toward her, his fists trembling at his sides. For a moment, it looked like he might push forward, consequences be damned. But then the sirens gave a sharp, rising wail, close enough now that the red and blue flashes of police lights became visible through the trees. Damn it! Tank cursed, his voice cracking with anger. He shot Morgan a venomous glare. This ain't over. Morgan's voice was cold and precise. Yes, it is. With a growl of frustration, Tank turned on his heel, motioning for the others to follow. Let's go! Move! Patchy Beard didn't hesitate, limping after Tank with a grimace. The younger men exchanged one last glance at Morgan, their faces a mixture of anger and unease, before trailing after their leader. One of them muttered under his breath, "She's crazy!" as they disappeared into the shadows of the tree line. Morgan stayed rooted in place, her body still coiled with tension. Her ears tracked the fading sound of their footsteps, her eyes scanning the clearing to make sure none of them doubled back. Only when she was certain they were gone did she allow herself to exhale. The sirens were nearly upon her now, the crunch of tires on gravel signaling the arrival of law enforcement. 2 squad cars pulled to a stop at the edge of the clearing, their lights painting the trees in bursts of red and blue. The officers stepped out cautiously, their hands resting on their belts as they surveyed the scene. One of them, a tall man with a clipped tone of authority, approached her. "Ma'am, are you okay? We got a call about a disturbance in the park." Morgan nodded, keeping her tone even. "I'm fine." "They're gone now." The officer's eyes lingered on her for a moment, noting the scrape on her arm and the subtle shift in her stance that betrayed the pain she was masking. "Did they hurt you?" Morgan shook her head. "Nothing I can't handle." Another officer scanned the area, noticing the disturbed dirt and a few items left behind. One of the younger men's hats, a discarded stick. He turned back toward his partner. "Looks like they ran in a hurry." The first officer sighed, pulling out a notepad. "Can you describe them?" Morgan hesitated, her mind racing through the events of the past several minutes. She could feel the adrenaline beginning to ebb, replaced by the dull ache of bruises and the sharp sting of her arm. 4 of them, mid-20s mostly. The leader's tall, shaved head, tattoos on his neck. Calls himself Tank. The officer nodded, jotting down her words. "Did they say anything? Anything to suggest why they targeted you?" Morgan's jaw tightened. She could still hear their words echoing in her head. The mocking tone, the slurs, the hatred barely disguised as bravado. She chose her words carefully. It wasn't random. They knew what they were doing. The officer's pen hovered over the page, his brow furrowing. "Meaning?" Morgan met his gaze evenly. "Meaning they've done this before, and they'll do it again." The officer's expression hardened as he finished taking notes. "We'll keep an eye out for them. In the meantime, we'd like you to come down to the station and file a formal report." Morgan nodded slowly. "I'll meet you there." As the officers returned to their vehicles, Morgan took a moment to steady herself. The clearing was quiet again, but the weight of what had just happened lingered heavily in the air. This wasn't over. Tank's parting words weren't just a threat, they were a challenge, and Morgan had no intention of backing down. The fluorescent lights of the police station buzzed faintly overhead as Morgan sat in a chair across from Officer Reyes. Her expression was calm, but her body still thrummed with adrenaline. The confrontation at the park was over, but the weight of the men's words lingered, their hateful intent unmistakable. She replayed the encounter in her mind, Not just the physical fight, but the taunts, the sneers, and the pointed reminders of why they had chosen her as their target. Reyes, a young officer with a no-nonsense demeanor, flipped open his notebook. "Let's start from the top, Ms. Blake. You said there were 4 men. You mentioned their leader calls himself Tank. Can you walk me through exactly what happened?" Morgan recounted the events in sharp, precise detail. Tank's mocking tone, the hateful comments, the way they surrounded her like a pack of wolves. Reyes's pen moved quickly across the page, his expression growing darker as her story unfolded. When she finished, he tapped the pen against his notebook thoughtfully. "This doesn't sound random. You're sure you've never seen these men before?" "I'm sure," Morgan replied. "They weren't after my bag. That was just